Hi, folks. It's time for my yearly re-record. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often because my supporters deserve to be thanked, and I want to keep things more up to date going forward. First off, thank you for returning to the Whiskey Ring. If this is your first time here, or if you're a frequent listener, please take the moment to like and subscribe, rate and review wherever you found the podcast. If you have suggestions for how to make the podcast better, or guests or topics you'd like to hear, please reach out to me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com or via Facebook or Instagram. Second, I want to thank my vintage level sponsors, those at the highest level who keep this podcast going. Truly, without these supporters, I would have had to stop doing this a long time ago. Thank you specifically to Don, to John and Jim, Bill and Connor, Steve, Jake and Bill, Trevor, Michael and Jesse, Jared, Brendan and Larry, Logan, Patrick and Andrew, Dustin, Wade and Gavin, Daniel, and Justin. Thank you all for supporting, listening, telling your friends about this podcast. Cannot stress enough how much you all make this possible to go forward. If you haven't yet joined the Patreon, please consider doing so at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. You can support for as little as $5 a month, where you can have access to ad-free episodes, and will also have priority if a vintage spot becomes available. Those spots are strictly limited, so if a spot becomes available, you're going to want to be the first to know. Lastly, going forward, I am trying to be better about posting show notes for each episode on my website, whiskeymyweddingring.com. These show notes will have links to websites and socials for my guests, and will also have additional information not in the interview, including reviews and tasting notes whenever possible or relevant. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to have you back as a listener next week. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today I'm thrilled to be going back to the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, a place I first discovered thanks to Isle of Harris Distillery. And thanks to the Harris Distillery, I got introduced to today's guests. We've got Jonny Ingledew, hope I pronounced that okay, co-founder, and Jacob Crisp, distillery manager for North Uist Distillery. Almost caught myself. North Uist Distillery in the Outer Hebrides. So Jonny, Jacob, welcome.
Hi, David. Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah.
So let's just get started. The distillery was founded in 2019, but I'd love to hear, I guess, from you, Jonny, the origin story of North Uist.
Yeah. So, the history of our business is going back to around 2015, sorry. Yeah, me and my partner were living in the east coast of Scotland, northeast in Aberdeen. I used to work in the oil industry, and my partner was an art and design teacher. And at the weekends, we'd go hill walking in the Cairngorms, basically, the kind of mountain ranges in the Highlands of Scotland, and visit distilleries, pick up a bottle of whiskey and have a few drams over the weekend, just whilst we're out camping around a campfire. And, it was that kind of time spent sampling whiskies and visiting distilleries that really kind of set a bit of a passion in us to explore the category, but also with the idea of maybe moving back home and starting our own distillery. We're both from Uist, and we were very keen to move back home, but we're just kind of waiting on the right moment so that we had something to do when we moved back home. And there's one specific walk where we really just decided to go for it, and I remember it so well. And the next day, basically on Monday, we went back to our works and handed our notice in, and I enrolled in brewing distilling course at Heriot-Watt, a master's there, which is where I met Jacob. We were at uni together, and that was great, kind of 1-year course. And off the back of that, when I worked in the industry for a while, worked at Chase Distillery down in England. I kind of went into the gin side of things, and we did that got a little bit of experience in the industry, and then me and my partner Kate moved back home to start the business. And I mean, it was quite, we actually wanted to start with a whiskey distillery, and we spent about 2 years and a hell of a lot of money designing and planning a whiskey distillery from the ground up on a greenfield site. And a greenfield site means, not using an existing building, just building it from scratch on virgin land kind of thing. And heck of a process to go through. And it turned out trying to build a distillery is very expensive as well. And when we got the final cost back of that project, it was, with the equipment and the building itself, it was several £1 million. And we had this realization that we were just never going to be able to raise this money. It would have been, we did kind of try a wee bit, but just trying to convince investors, friends and family, anyone with money to put a bit of money into us was such a leap of faith because, we didn't have any experience in the industry at that time. I had a bit of training, but no track record. So, we kind of realized that, and we decided to pivot and start a small gin distillery in the meantime. And we did manage to find a small building on Uist, an industrial unit with which to start that from. And, lots of people will be familiar with the fact that starting a gin distillery is very easy by comparison to whiskey. Like, the equipment required so little by comparison, and you can really start it for a couple £1,000. I mean, people start gin distilleries from their garden sheds and their kitchen, etc. So we were slightly bigger scale from that, but not much, just in a small industrial unit of 100 litre still. And yeah, just grew the business organically from that, just with Kate and I, and then slowly took on staff. And we did that for around 4 years from our old site before a building came available with which we could move our whiskey plans into. And kind of buying an existing building is way cheaper to do than building from scratch, especially in Uist where we're based. So that's what we did, and we kind of managed to reignite our whiskey plans from there. And I mean, Jacob had joined the team since then, and he kind of really worked with us to develop our whiskey proposition. And that's going back about kind of 3 to 4 years ago now. That we really kind of started delving back into that, picking it up, working with a process design company to design the distillery. That's the start of our kind of whiskey journey from then on, basically.
Awesome. And the distillery being built, and I mean the idea coming, it's relatively recent in terms of distilleries, and it's kind of at the tail end of the first wave of Scottish craft distilling. But you said, you got the master's in brewing and distilling at Heriot-Watt. And I know you were particularly fascinated with the craft beer and spirits movement. Was there, in between the original thought, the walking the Cairngorms, and deciding, okay, we're going to do this, and starting to plan it out and build, what made you go for the MBD as opposed to straight into like kind of an on-the-job experience versus the academic experience?
Yeah, so specifically we decided to get the academic experience because, first of all, master's is a pretty short time. I mean, 1 year and you go from zero to, having a pretty good understanding of the industry from a theoretical perspective anyway. So it's a great course to do, but, we were very keen and passionate about being able to do everything in-house ourselves. So, having the skills to distill in-house as opposed to starting up where, you kind of outsource production. And we're talking about gin production here especially, which is quite a common way distilleries get started, 100% set on distilling out ourselves. But also, trying to, distilling was new to the islands of Uist at that stage, and even mostly to Hebrides in general. So there wasn't an established pool of talent on the island either. And, trying to persuade a distiller to come up to Uist at the time when we were starting a new business probably would have been potentially a bit risky. For us, it was about, for me, I was quite keen to kind of get the experience, theoretical knowledge so that I could do it in the house. And then afterwards went on and got a bit of practical experience. I mean, I would have loved to have worked in distilleries for, 10, 20 years, but you just got to decide, when have you got the bare minimum that you need to get started, because you learn a lot on the job ultimately. And it does mean you make a lot more mistakes, and they can get quite expensive. One of which I talked about, that kind of greenfield whiskey distillery site that we never developed, but spent 2 years working on it. With a bit more experience, we would have realized that that's kind of what the costs come in at. But a lesson learned, and a very costly lesson I won't be forgetting anytime soon. But since then, now we've got an established business, and there's a bit of kind of revenue in the business now to, kind of pay for staff and whatnot. We've been able to, kind of hire in talent that can kind of take us to the next level in that respect. And, that's what Jacob has brought in for. Jacob kind of went and focused on the whiskey side of things after we graduated and I kind of focused on the gin side of things. So quite complementary skill sets because we're a gin and whiskey distillery here essentially.
Right. And Jacob, I'll throw it to you first to hear kind of your journey as well, and then I'd love to hear from both of you your kind of inspirations and guidance in that can be both on the job, it can be just people that in the industries that you admired and wanted to learn from as well.
Yeah, so um, I originally studied chemistry um, in Glasgow, and I was kind of on the path to going into um, going into basically lab work, going on to a PhD. My brother had followed a very similar path. He studied biology and then went on to do a PhD in virology, and I was kind of fairly straight on that path. But I was just after my degree, I was just a little bit sick of working in the lab, being in the city. I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland. I was kind of a little bit more used to that. So I finished university, moved back home. I started doing quite a lot of brewing and a little bit of distilling with my dad, um, and didn't really know what I was doing. I never really intended to turn that into anything. It was just kind of something interesting that we were doing. And then someone sort of mentioned, I didn't really know what I was going to do with my chemistry degree, but someone mentioned that there's this brewing and distilling course. Um, and I mean, for me, it never really started with this kind of passion um, for whiskey. I like beer. I was kind of interested in the brewing process and the malting process and various things around that. But it was really just I have a lot of interests that involve being in the countryside. I love going rock climbing, surfing, this sort of thing. And I kind of twigged that there were a lot of distilleries in the countryside. There's not many businesses that are kind of outside of the city, especially involving a chemistry degree. And I, I thought that might be a good path, and that was really the where my interest started. I was just really looking for a way to live near to the things that I want to do, and then went to study brewing and distilling. Got a lot more interested in it. It's kind of it's a very interesting course. And then during the MSc, me and my dad were still doing quite a lot of brewing. We had also started growing heritage barley varieties, and we've got a little bit of land um, around our house. So my dad has kind of got hold of these old barley varieties, kind of extinct barley varieties. They're not really extinct, but kind of very old barley varieties in very small quantities. And we'd started the process of bulking those up. So you start out with kind of a handful of seed, and you sow it, you harvest it, you've got a little bit more seed, so you sow that, and then you harvest it, and then you've got a little bit more, and you keep doing that progressively, and then you've got enough seed that you can actually sow a field. And during that process, um, I I think I read an article about Phil and Simon Thompson at Dornoch Distillery, or before Dornoch Distillery. Phil and Simon Thompson of Dornoch Castle Hotel, because they didn't have a distillery at that point, and they were speaking about old style whiskey and do you know about Dornoch Distillery and Phil and Simon?
I don't honestly. I've heard the name, but that's really all I know about them.
Okay, so they're very interested in this kind of this old style of whiskey. They're kind of saying that whiskey in the kind of 1920s, 50s to up to like kind of 1970, that was kind of the golden age of whiskey, and um, these kind of older traditional practices, so kind of brewer's yeast, long fermentations, open top fermentations, old barley varieties, floor malted barley, um, these traditional practices made whiskey in a much different way than it is made now, and they preferred that. And that I just read this article about them using old barley varieties. I didn't really have an understanding of what they were talking about, and I just kind of went over to have a chat with them. And just me and my dad are growing these old barley varieties. Do you want to use some of it to make whiskey? And they just offered me a job while I was there. So that's really the start of my whiskey journey. I didn't really have this kind of passion for whiskey. It was more just I thought that might be a fun job, so I went to study brewing and distilling, and then I just sort of Phil and Simon crossed my path, and I went to talk to them, and then I went to start working with them, and then my interest and my passion for making whiskey has just kind of grown from there. So working in Dornoch was a very kind of interesting process. It's a very small, hands-on distillery. They're kind of really focused on they're really focused on kind of not experimentation, but we used a lot of different barley varieties, a lot of different yeast varieties. We were encouraged to try different parameters. We were really trying to kind of maximize flavor in the whiskey, and there was a lot of different and interesting things going on there, which is a very good learning process. And I was there for about 7 years, and then that kind of takes me on to joining this project. So while I was in Dornoch, I was still in touch with Jonny. When we were at university, Jonny was kind of talking about this distillery, and we would kind of check in every so often, and it would just be kind of like, what stage is everything at, what's happening, and then it kind of just grew from there. And eventually, I kind of joined the project, and I was kind of lucky enough to be able to play a part in some of the process design of the distillery, which was quite interesting as well. And I could kind of take some things that I'd learned in Dornoch to kind of contribute to how this distillery actually runs now. So it's been a very fun journey.
Yeah, it's been a long time to get here as well. I guess even from that, the first points of speaking to Allen Associates, the process design company that we used, it was a good couple years of design work, and back and forth, etc. And then, I kind of like 6 months of building renovations and maybe, 6 months of fit out and whatnot for the equipment. So yeah, long old road. It takes a lot of time.
In some ways, I admire the fact, given your timeline, I admire how quickly you've gotten things up and running, because not only did you have an original site, and then not to mention the Greenfield site, but the original site, and then now where you are in Nunton Steddings, you also had pandemic in the middle of that, towards the beginning of it. So just as a something that keeps popping out in different interviews that I read or listened to, was that from the beginning of your story, there seems to be strong community buy-in. And that can be anything from, helping to forage for botanicals you use throughout the year, sometimes in exchange for a bottle of gin. But I mean, to selling 150 bottles of gin in your first day of sales. Jonny, I know you and Kate are from the island. Jacob, you said you were from the Highlands, so slightly different lifestyle over there. But I mean, maybe not a huge difference. I don't know. I'm a city boy, so that's kind of all I've known. But what do you think has led to such a strong community buy-in, like I said, really from the beginning?
Yeah, I think, and it'll be the same where Jacob's from as well, just rural places, basically. There's a stronger community. Everyone knows each other and your neighbors. Locally, having grown up here and moved back home, it's a small place. I mean, Uist is a collection of islands, maybe about, 6 or 7 islands, and it's like 5,000 people. So, you don't know everybody, obviously, but, you're pretty familiar with a lot of folk. And, people like to see really supportive Hebrideans, and they like to see other, people on the island doing well, basically, and new exciting projects, one that bring employment and, kind of promote the HEBRIDES as a brand. I don't think at the time, Uist didn't have any spirit brands or any kind of alcohol brands established, or any kind of, consumer packaged goods really, other than salmon, I think. So, having something out there that promoted the islands of Uist as well, I think was a bit of a point of pride for some folk. And yeah, we have always been quite keen to get the community involved in everything we're doing. And you did talk about our kind of barter system for botanicals, which is a big part of it. But, we do try and involve in other ways as well, whether it's, letting the community use our visitor center space, because it's kind of a lovely building we're in, community events. There's lots of opportunities where we try and fold in. I remember we had this at BARLEY that had certain traces of oats and rye in it as well as barley, and we wanted to try and get about 100 kilos of this grain sorted so that we could just have 100% pure barley instead of having this kind of 5% adjuncts in it. So, I remember a whole summer we had members of the community coming in to help us hand sort this seed individually, grain by grain. It was very time consuming, but people loved the opportunity to come in and kind of share part of that journey with us. So yeah, it's really, really nice, and for us to see people getting invested in what we're doing here and really helping to promote our brand. We don't obviously have a big marketing budget, so for us, a big part of our the way we get our name out there is just through the kind of diaspora effect of locals, helping to spread the word and sending bottles of gin out to people for their, kind of birthdays and stuff like that, and that really helps and counts for a lot. And we're really, really thankful for that.
I mean, you mentioned the populations are not huge. I mean, 5,000 people across 6 to 7 islands, and a common story, if you will, through locations like this, and I would expand to Harris as well, but also Faroe Islands, out in the Atlantic and in Iceland as well. There's usually some element in these stories too. You want to bring jobs back to the community, be an economic driver, whether that's tourism, pure sales, something. In one of the interviews you did, though, it was noted that there's surprisingly low unemployment in the Outer Hebrides. And as a result, you have to, I guess there's less kind of desperation for jobs. So you really do have to provide an attractive package for employees. And I think there's something similar on Isla. We were just talking to Sukinder Singh about the Port of Truant project, and he was saying, like, as much as the island might resist having another distillery on there, posted 2 jobs and had 80 responses for it. So there's a big drive for it. Have you? And I apologize, this is an awkward question to ask with Jacob right next to you, but have you faced any challenges in attracting people for the jobs that you need, really like the full-time jobs at the distillery?
Yeah, we have, there's, I guess, jobs that we can fill from the local market, which are, you can, to a certain degree, kind of learn on the job essentially. And, it's less technically, a less technically required role in terms of previous kind of experience. The kind of more critical hires like distillers, distillery manager, bringing those in from the mainland is what we've done for Jacob and the distillers that work in his team as well. And yeah, thankfully we've been able to hire in quite easily. We did another recruitment round in October time, and had a lot of responses to that actually. And we've got a distiller from Germany that joined us in October, November last year. To be fair, at the moment, with the way the industry's going, it's if you're hiring as a distillery, then you're going to get a lot of applicants because there's a lot of folk being laid off in the industry. So yeah, there's certainly that element, but locally we've always never struggled, thankfully, to hire. We're quite a kind of young team. Everyone here is probably under about 45. Quite a fun team. We're doing something that's quite fun as well. It's a fun industry, so in that respect, do you want to come and sell gin, make whiskey? The answer to that's usually yes. So in that respect, it kind of works with us. But yeah, we do try to look after the team and take that side of things quite seriously as well. I mean, we're kind of B Corp business, so that comes with certain commitments and requirements and philosophies with the way that you treat your team, your community, and obviously the planet side of things as well. So yeah, thankfully for us, it's not been too much of an issue. But since we started up as a business, we were distilling gin and selling gin for about 5 years, and then moved into, as we started moving into whiskey and planning that, another distillery actually started up on the same island as us about the same time, and we both started whiskey production in the same year actually. So since then, it has been, I guess we've got to be a bit more aware that there's other options for distillers, and all our team basically on the island with another distillery now, and hopefully it doesn't go the way of Isla where it gets hyper difficult to kind of hire talent basically. But at the moment we're kind of getting on well with that, and our staff retention is really really high, which is good. So yeah, it kind of feels a bit more like a family, really, the business.
Fantastic. So as you mentioned, you're now in the second site in Nutten Steddings, and I mean this is a site that dates back to the 1300s as a nunnery convent. I think nunnery is only, we say nunnery, but it's only used in Shakespeare, I think. But so it's always a convent, but nunnery sounds better. So you guys got to acquire this in 2020 and redevelop it to become your new site. I'll assume by being locals, you and Kate kind of knew of Nutten Steddings and the history there. What led to the decision to say, okay, this is going to be the site, and then the work that you had to do afterwards to make it fit for distilling?
Yeah, we were really lucky to get this site. Just to say, first of all, it's a beautiful building, Grade B listed, which kind of means, don't know if you've got the same terminology and across the pond, but it kind of means it's got certain planning restrictions and requirements of which to for any changes done to the building. But yeah, we'd been growing up on Uist, and this being such a kind of iconic building on the island, it's very unique. We were very aware of it, and being here for events, growing up, as many folk on the island have been. It was a community building for many a year, about 20 years before we bought it. So there's lots of like Kayleys, weddings, etc. over the years, with lots of locals coming along here, and itself, like lots of different businesses were in here, different community kind of organizations. There's like a radio station based here, and there's a coffin maker in the corner. It's kind of used as agricultural buildings as well for quite a time. There's like a store for like local kind of Boy Scouts, I think. So a cafe. So lots and lots of things basically. The building had kind of fallen into a bit of disuse though in the last couple of years before we took it over. But it was kind of like furnished to the point where it had like electricity, running water. The walls were painted. It had like double glazing in some of the windows and stuff. But it was kind of getting to the point where there's some holes developing in the roof and stuff. So yeah, our kind of jobs coming in have really just been looking after the building, really consider ourselves caretakers to the building. When you've got a building of this age, you don't really come in and own it. You're really just looking after it and treating it with respect until the next owners come in, basically. So that's the approach we've got to it, and that's why we've not actually changed the name of this building. We still just call it Nutten Steddings because it had its name before we came along, and it'll continue to have it after we've left. So yeah, it's been a lovely space to move into, and it's got really nice features, amazing history. It's the site of they planned the escape of Bonnie Prince Charlie across the sea to sky. Basically just in this compound with the house across the road, which is a famous story basically that's kind of sung about in the TV show Outlander. So that's kind of a bit of history with regards to the building. But it did come with certain challenges for putting whiskey equipment into it. It was always designed as like a agricultural building, and it didn't have, like big double doors and stuff. So there's quite a bit of renovation work required for making it distillery ready. and the walls aren't designed for like weight bearing pipe work and stuff like that. And really, the distillery space, which we're just beside now, is really, really small for the amount of equipment we wanted to fit in. We had this existing whiskey plans from our greenfield site that I talked about before. It's kind of half-ton distillery setup, and we just tried to squash these plans into the space that we've got here. And I mean, the process design company we used, like Forsyth Allen Associates, they're kind of the same organization now, based in Scotland. They did a brilliant job, but they were like tearing their hairs out. I mean, trying to get all this equipment in was a real challenge. And when you go, if you're to walk the room, it's just pipe work over pipe work, and very, very busy space, and a bit challenging for the distillers to work in. You can basically throw a tennis ball from one end of the distillery to the other. It's that small, but we've managed to fit in a fully functional distillery with a half-ton mash tun, and what's the size of our wash and spirit stills?
3,000 litre, 3,000 litre and 2,000 litre.
So, on the small side for big whiskey distilleries, but, it's still a decent size kind of thing, really. So, yeah, the guys have done well, but we've got our stills are poking out the roof of the building, actually. The kind of swan, the swan head or the top of the still, basically. And the line arm and the condensers roll outside the building, which is quite an unusual thing to have for whiskey distilleries. There is like a few others that have that. But for us, it's been a necessity, really, just because we couldn't fit the stills in otherwise. And in a way, it's quite nice because, first of all, this building really suits being a whiskey distillery. Just got the look of it, but it's just on the small side. But it does mean that the distillery itself, the building, has had a bit of a say in, the way that we make whiskey, and probably the style of whiskey that we make as well. With these, swan necks, the top of the stills poking out the roof, kind of means that we get a certain amount of reflux depending on what the weather's like outside, essentially. And we've got downward facing line arms which match the pitch of the roof, so that kind of leans us into a certain type of spirit style as well. And then we've got wooden washbacks inside as well, which along kind of help bed in a little bit of the local kind of microbiome of the building, essentially. So there's nice touch points with regards to that. And then we've got our visitor center space where we've got like a shop and small bar and a tasting room. And then we've got space for about 300 casks on site as well, which is part of the founder casks that we've sold to individuals, basically. And they will get to come in and kind of, see their cask and have a sample whenever they want, basically. So the building's quite well set up for that, and the way it's laid out. And then we'll hopefully come onto it later as a separate talking piece, but we're also going to be building a malting shed on site as well this year.
That will definitely be a question. Yeah, I know that it's been a dream for you to be able, like you said, to not only grow but to malt all the way through distilling on the island and where you are. So before I'm going to jump into the gin in a second, but before then, Jacob, you mentioned that you and your family, you and your dad were already familiar with barley like beer barley that you guys are using just through experimentation and trying out different older landrace varieties. Did you, when you came onto the project, did you have to present, hey, we should use this barley to Jonny, or Jonny, did you already know, like, hey, we want to use a more heritage grain that we could potentially grow on the island?
Yeah, I think we were both on the same wavelength with that, really, weren't we? I mean, Uist has got a great history with BERE. BERE is predominantly just grown, in Orkney and then in Uist, and as far as I'm aware, that's kind of like some of the key areas where it's really still grown, and it's got its own specific strain to these islands. And Orkney's still a bit more developed, and they've got their own mill there. But Uist is kind of like the breadbasket of the Outer Hebrides. There's a lot of the kind of fertile ground here. This is where most of the combine harvesters are located, and the infrastructure for that. So, this is going back to 2016, 2017 time. That even then, we knew it was going to be BERE barley. It's actually quite hard to set up the supply chain for that, though. And Jacob and I have, kind of spent a lot of time, engaging with crofters and kind of looking at ways to develop that. Yeah, it does take a lot of work, though, to kind of get all the infrastructure in place to do that. And we're kind of making good progress on that. And certainly the malting plant as the next logical step in that, so that we can close the circle on using locally grown grain. But in the meantime, we've got like a variety of heritage varieties that Jacob's kind of looks after and chooses what we use for our malt bill.
We've been growing these heritage barley varieties. My dad was basically kind of he was probably the driving force behind me developing an interest in brewing, and almost certainly the person that introduced me to whiskey as well. We would have been. He's always been a kind of a whiskey fan. Living in Scotland, whiskey is everywhere. There's always a bottle of whiskey in the cupboard. The people always bring a bottle of whiskey round. When I went to start working in Dornoch, that's really where we exclusively used heritage barley varieties, and we used a lot of different heritage barley varieties. We used a lot of BERE actually in our production, but we predominantly used varieties like Plumage Archer, Marisota, Golden Promise. We used some older varieties like BERE and Scotch and Nat, and we used a lot of these different barley varieties, and that was using these different barley varieties really allows you to, and we use distilling malt as well, so you can really kind of determine for yourself the difference in flavor that you're getting from all of these different barley varieties. Kind of as I said before, like Johnny kind of had his own plans for making the distillery, and I just sort of was just sort of aware of them. Johnny's plan just sort of grew on its own. He was always planning on using this BERE barley. I was just sort of my interest was just growing and growing the more he kind of told me about the project. So I think he wanted to use the BERE, and I'm not sure at what point he was wanting to do the malting. I'd already sort of developed my own kind of interest in malting. Me and my dad used to do a lot of small scale malting for making beer. I really love this concept of kind of doing everything yourself. So growing the barley yourself. I used to get barley from a local farm, and then we would malt it ourselves. And then we were growing a lot of hops, and we were just kind of taking on that whole process. I love that concept of getting everything right here and just taking the process all the way through. So when Johnny kind of mentioned that he wanted a small maltings as well, that also was a big kind of piqued my interest. And then when I joined the project, I really kind of thought, kind of as you mentioned, we were at the kind of tail end of that big wave of new distilleries, and it was my kind of opinion that we were going to be a little bit late to the game, and a lot of distilleries were already saying, let's use old barley varieties, let's kind of do this quote unquote flavor forward approach. It's kind of there's a lot of people already doing this. You're not going to be making a unique product if you're just kind of doing the same things that a lot of other people are doing, and they're almost certainly going to be doing it in a much more well-funded way. Most of these distilleries have got much larger budgets, and they're bigger. With economy of scale, they're always going to be able to produce things at a slightly more competitive price. So when I joined the project, I really pushed for this, the malting plant to kind of grow and grow, to the point where the plant that we're putting in now is completely traditional floor malting, and then it's also it's designed such that we could produce 100% of all of the malt that we need. So we want to establish this supply chain of the BERE on the island. We want this to be a kind of common thread that runs through everything that we're making here. But realistically, I don't think we'll ever be able to produce 100% of the barley variety, the barley requirements for the distillery using BERE. One, the supply chain is very difficult to get this amount of grain grown on the island, grown and harvested and dried and stored. It's maybe we'll be able to grow that supply chain, but yeah, as Johnny said, it's difficult. But I really like this concept of we used a lot of different barley varieties in Dornoch. I really love this concept of each of these varieties is providing a different flavor profile, and what I want to do in the distillery, and what we're doing in the distillery already, is we're building a mash bill with these different barley varieties. So we're using BERE in everything that we're making, and then on top of that, we're going to be building a mash bill kind of around that to just create this flavor profile that we want to make. So everything we make is using heritage barley varieties, but it's more kind of using each variety for its different flavor and trying to build that mash bill up. That's kind of where my one of my interests in what we're doing here.
And before I forget, I do have to ask, just because of last name, any relation to the Crisp Maltings family?
Maybe distantly. The maltings just my genes.
We don't get any discounts on the grain.
We don't get any discounts.
Yeah. Fair enough. So,
you know, just going to go back. I was talking about here. You know, it is, we're kind of small scale here, and essentially what we're kind of doing is taking whiskey really back to its roots, you know, and doing everything on site. You know, traditionally distilleries, Scotch whiskey distilleries, would have been these small operations on farms and growing their own barley, malting it on site, distilling and maturing on site, really just as a way, you know, to lock in the grain, the crop, and make that shelf stable. So that's what we're kind of doing here. You know, over the years, whiskey's obviously become more industrialized and commoditized almost, where, you know, all of a sudden grain's coming from Europe and a big distillery just does the distilling, you know, it's malted somewhere else. And then they send tankers of liquid out to, you know, a warehouse and somewhere else to get matured and bottled at a big factory. But, you know, you do start to lose some of the kind of like, you know, not to use terroirs, obviously is an often overused word, but you do kind of start to lose the, you know, those different touch points of the whiskey where you can choose to layer in flavor and influence. And for us, it's quite important that, you know, local barley, local to the distillery. We don't actually grow ourselves. We don't own any land, but we do collaborate with local crofters with which to grow barley. And we've also collaborated with a big farm on the mainland in Sutherland that Jacob's dad's involved with, and they kind of grow organic barley for us with wildflower strips. It looks amazing. But, you know, kind of local, good quality and local BERE barley and other heritage varieties, distilled on site, matured on site, bottled on site as well. So that full kind of field to bottle approach, although we're not actually growing the barley ourselves, but it is local barley. And really, there's not that many distilleries that do that. You know, you could probably count at one or two hands to the amount where we're going to be using so much of our own malted barley. So it's a bit more uncommon these days, but I do like that approach. And I think that's where Jacob and I's philosophies absolutely align, is, you know, this kind of smaller boutique style whiskey distilling, basically, where you're really focusing in on points of differentiation and points of layering in flavor.
Sure. And I was thinking too, I think as of now, and correct me if I'm a little behind, but as of now, you are able to make about a cask a day of whiskey. What will the malting floor, malting shed look like, you know, size wise and function wise, to be able to support that as far as possible, even if you can't get to that full 100%?
What will it look like? It's a floor maltings, so a big floor. It's just quite simple. It's kind of just going to be a large shed with a lot of floor space, and then there's a lot of equipment around that, basically just moving grain from one stage to another. But floor malting is as simple as it gets. You put all the grain into a big tank and you steep it. And then once you've tricked the grain into thinking it's the rain has come and it's time to germinate, then you spread it out onto a large floor, and then it's just manual monitoring that and turning it in order to just try and maintain ideal conditions for it before we switch it onto another floor where we can run hot air into it from below. Like you've seen kind of these, if you've been to some distilleries that still have their kind of traditional floors and kilns, it's going to be like that. It's just a kind of a big floor, a big tank, then a big floor, and then another floor with a perforated floor, and then we're going to just run hot air through the grain in order to dry it, and then kind of out of a classic sort of pagoda style roof. So it's so that's kind of it.
So what's the capacity? Is it 3 ton of
yeah? So we can put around in its current form, we can put about 3 ton of grain per batch. We can run. We've got enough floor space that we can be kind of running batches. So theoretically, we could have the kiln running fairly flat out with a batch comes off, the next one goes on, and you've got batches on the floor kind of moving up the floor in different stages. So it kind of it will start at this end of the building, and then when it's a little bit further on, it will move up to the middle of the room, and the next batch will come out of the steep, and then it will sit on the floor, and it will kind of move up the room and then into the kiln. So theoretically, we could run that flat out, and I think we're actually able to produce over 200 tons if we were to kind of really run it flat out at a kind of quite a tight schedule. We use around 150 tons of grain in our current production schedule. I would love to get up to using 100% malted barley by ourselves. I'd love to get to the point where, as Jonny mentions, we work with various farmers on the island, but we also work with another farm on the mainland. They're able to grow us. It's amazing having this connection with the farm, because you can talk to the farmer and ask him to grow whatever you want in whatever way you want, and they're going to probably say no a lot of the time, but you have that connection with it. You know how it's been grown, you know how it's been harvested. You can ask them to dry it to exactly how you want it. You can have that connection with them. So theoretically, we will be able to just ask people to grow whatever barley variety we want, and then take it on island and malt it ourselves. We want to grow as much as possible on the island, but there's obviously there's challenges associated with that. It's also just a good idea to grow some on the mainland. It's just a lot safer. You can lose your entire harvest here because a flock of geese came through. So it's just a little bit safer for us if we can grow it in a few different locations. But also, BERE barley is genetically designed to grow on the islands. It has this short growing season because we have a short summer. It grows a lot shorter to the ground. It grows quickly and it grows short, and that's so that the wind just doesn't blow it all over. It's got other adaptations it's got, so it will, instead of blowing over like a modern barley variety, it will lodge, so it will break at the nodule instead of just falling flat, in which case you can't harvest it. It will kind of lodge, so you're still able to combine it. So you can't really grow modern barley varieties on US. You can, but it's just not ideal for it at all. Whereas the BERE, it is perfectly suited to growing on the island. So if we want to grow other barley varieties, which we do, we want to use different barley varieties, we need to get them from other places.
And there was a scientific article put out in 23 in Plants, People, Planet that was talking all about using these BERE barley from these landscapes. And like you said, it was really just Orkney and the Outer Hebrides where it's still grown. Tolerance to disease resistance, early heading data, ability to grow on marginal high pH soils, tolerance to salinity stress because you're on the coast of the Atlantic. You're going to get a lot of the cross-Atlantic winds coming in. But you do have the advantage, I guess, that because that barley has been continuously grown there, you don't have to convince the farmer as much. You're not going to a farmer who's been growing I mean, Concerto, Laureate, Golden Promise, any of these, higher yield, more modern grains, you don't have to go to them and say, hey, we'd like you to grow a lower yield, more expensive crop that you might have to change your process for. Here is just, we want to buy what you're already growing, at least for the BERE varietal. I'm not sure where that customer's going to go, but
you're totally right there, David, and it's a really good point. It's we're lucky because bear's always been grown here. It's just like Neolithic sites that have bear and that show it's been grown here for a few thousand years, and and as Jacob mentioned, it's the only grain that grows here because of the climate, basically. So crofters grow it; they get their 1 ton per acre yield, which is what they know. Laureate on the mainland will get 4 tons per acre. So there's completely different economics. But no one on the mainland grows bear because unless it's for a specific need, because it's just not economically viable. And that's the history piece of whiskey is interesting because every whiskey in the world used to be made with bear grain because it is the oldest barley variety in use. And then over the years, it's changed out for modern varieties due to yield factors and the ease of using more modern varieties in the production equipment as well. But it is an opportunity for us to use this local grain, and the crofters have always grown it. Crofter is like a farmer, basically. That's the terminology we use out here. Crofters have always grown it for cattle feed. So what we're doing is working with these crofters to take it out that kind of production cycle and use it in our distilling process. But that does require something like equipment. You need a good grain dryer capacity and combiners, so you can combine it and then dry the grain down, which can have like a 30% moisture content potentially when you harvest it, and you've got to dry that down to 12% or 14% within like 24 hours, or else it goes moldy, kind of thing. So you've really got to be on it, and like the crofters are kind of looking at the weather forecast when it's coming to kind of like August, September time, ready to harvest. Or August here, really, because of the geese issue that we've got, wild geese coming in. But if there's a big storm coming, they've just got to say, right, it's not ripe enough, but we've got to cut it now because otherwise it's going to be too wet and the storms are coming and it will all fall over. So it's not ideal growing conditions here, but it is a nice opportunity for us to work with these local growers. And we just need the grain. They get to keep the straw. They get the draft back afterwards after we finish our production process, and then we pay them for the grain as well. So it's actually quite a good opportunity here for the crofters to get an additional kind of like income stream for growing this bear grain for us, because it's nothing that's ever been done here before. So we're kind of, establishing the supply chain and learning the process as we go, really.
I was going to ask about the draft, because it's one thing to take the barley out of their production line to take it away from cattle feed or divert it away, but then since you're really removing the sugars from it, you're going to end up with a high protein mash at the end that you can send back. So in some ways, it's almost, from a nutritional standpoint, they're probably like, oh, this is even better, because then our cows are getting more protein and still not totally diverting the food stream. It's really just adding that extra step in between, like you said, and sending it back.
The cows, the first time they've ever had a hot meal as well. So the cows across the road are usually, stumping to, get at it.
And there's usually just that little bit of alcohol still in there. So it's very happy cows as well. So, I was going to jump over to the gin, but I think, we're in the whiskey mindset. Let's keep going with that, and we'll circle back to the gin at the end. Kind of testifying to the demand that you guys have had, both local community support, but also the international community that you've built through the gin in many ways. You mentioned earlier, you've got cask storage for 300 casks on site, and those have been sold to initial investors or initial rounds of people who wanted to buy a cask. Your first cask release saw 60 casks sell out in under 90 seconds. So
we were flabbergasted by that. The response was amazing. I think,
go ahead. I was going to say, like, what drove that? What was that like?
Yeah, I think part of the reason for that, to be fair, compared to new whiskey distilleries or maybe just getting established, is they don't have the customer base in place already. So, to be part of the big reason why we could do that was because we had our gin brand established, and, we had mailing list of 10,000 people or something. So that access to potential customers is critical if you're going to do a cask offer. But we were quite an expensive proposition, the casks, but the story's really good, and what we're hoping to do here, I think, is really resonating with people, and that's why we've been able to sell these casks in such like record-breaking time. And I mean, 90 seconds for 60 casks, which is the time it takes to complete a transaction on our website, is never been done before. Kind of record-breaking stuff. So it is like it's certainly hitting a chord with customers. We've sold about 200 casks now, and we're about to sell, for the 2 years that we've done production for now, we're about to sell our 2026 cask offering, which will be 100 casks as well, which will then fill up our warehouse. So that's going out in about a month's time, kind of mid-June time, and hopefully that sells out again, but maybe not. I mean, a lot of our customers that are interested in buying a cask have one now. But it's really nice having these, kind of customers and super fans, joining us for the whiskey journey. I mean, Jacob and the team have filled all these casks themselves, and the people who bought the casks have come in to join the filling experience for a lot of the casks. So, we've got to meet them all in person and, share a bit of our story, have a dram at the bar with them, and, roll their cask. That's a whole day production essentially. So, it's quite fun. They come in and do the whole filling experience. Then we roll it into the warehouse, and, that's what was done on that day. So it's completely different scale to the big distilleries, basically. Everything we do here in that whole day just goes into that one cask, single cask distillery.
And this new tranche of casks that's coming out, though, if I saw the email just a day or two ago, some of these will be the first peated malt that you've made.
Yeah, so we just started running peated malt recently, and Jacob can kind of tell you a bit more about that.
So we've just done a block of peated malt, and we've been kind of running through various kind of experiments on what we actually want our peated make to be like. So that's been a really interesting process. I don't think we're almost certainly going to produce everything, or 70% of unpeated make, and we'll just do a block every year of peated. So we're just trying to decide what that profile is actually going to be like. There's a bit of a change in the grain bill, and there has to be a little bit of a change in our cut points for the peat. But it's been a really interesting process. Really happy with everything that we've had so far. It's a tricky decision because every time we change a parameter, I don't think I've been unhappy with anything that's come off the stills. So we need to pick one. But it's a really interesting process. Really happy with how that's all coming out. It's just deciding on what do we actually want our peated make to taste like, and because there's obviously a lot of island distilleries are producing peated whiskey. The distillery up the road is producing exclusively peated whiskey, so we don't want to be producing something too similar to what they're producing. We want it to be kind of unique to us. But it's sorry, the long answer. We are it's very enjoyable. Everything is quite fun in the distillery. Every time we get to kind of try something new, it's a very interesting process.
Yeah, so a lot of conversations going on in the distillery because we don't have a track record, a history with which to dictate what kind of style of whiskey we're making. So, we're using all our own experiences of what whiskey we like and the options available to us to kind of shape what, the house style is going to be like. So, it's been a really, really fun and exciting, year and a half since we've started production.
And with like you said, Jacob, you wanted to not mirror the same style of whiskey or the same peat style that the distillery up the road is doing. where is your peat coming from, and do you anticipate in the future being able to peat your malt on site as well?
Potentially, yeah. Potentially, we would be able to peat our own malt on site. Currently, the plans are not to peat our own malt on site. It will be because we're only ever thinking we're going to be doing quite a small amount of peated make. We don't have the addition. We don't have the addition of a peat fire on the kiln. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of additional complexities to a malting plant when you add a fire, because right now we just have boilers that heat up air, and the air passes through the malt. When you add an actual fire with burning material, there's a lot of extra steps involved in that, and there's a lot of different bits of logistics involved in that. So it's kind of, if you want to make, there's quite a lot of extra expense, and there's quite a lot of extra design work required for that. So we decided that because we're not going to be producing a lot of peated malt, we would outsource our peated malt, and we would just do unpeated. Everything we will produce is unpeated. We might change that decision down the line, but that's the kind of current working plan. Our most of our malt comes from Crisp right now. So they're getting their peat from Aberdeenshire. So it's a different style of peat from almost certainly the same peat source as Uist Distillery up the road. Yeah, very similar peat source. I think I've obviously tasted the new make from Uist Distillery, and I don't think it's similar at all. What we really want to do here is we really want to try and make something that is unique to Uist and unique to this building. And Jonny kind of touched on that before. I've got, coming from my kind of previous experience, I had an idea of what style of whiskey we wanted to produce here, but to a certain extent, you do just have to allow the distillery character to show itself, and you can kind of mold it and point it in a certain direction. But really, we really want to make whiskey that's from the island. We don't want to make whiskey on the island. We want to make whiskey that's kind of really shaped by the island and by the people who are making it, and by the kind of by people on the island, like getting grain from the island, using kind of using local crofters. That's what we're aiming for. Yeah,
I like that it's you're going with the island and with the buildings, as opposed to trying to have a style in mind and fit the buildings and the style into that. Because, like you said, I mean, you're in a building it's listed, it's category B, so not a lot you can do with it. Can't just pull the roof off whole and throw in a tall Glenmorangie style still in there to make that kind of spirit. And in the location that you're in, are the casks still being aged? You said with the 300 capacity, it's in converted stables, right? So it's these thick stone walls. You can still get the salty sea air from the Atlantic, but it's thick stone walls, so it's a pretty consistent temperature for these casks to mature in.
Yeah. The whole building is an amazing space for a distillery. It's has its challenges because it's just a little bit too small, but it is a really great space for a distillery. It looks really great, as Jonny kind of says. It's kind of it looks like a really great distillery building, and then on top of that, we've got this kind of wing of the building that is kind of a perfect dunnage style warehouse with the, as you say, like big thick walls. It's the coldest place in the building, very consistent temperature, especially as we build up stock in that warehouse. The kind of thermal storage of that room is just going to be a really nice, stable temperature, damp, cold room for our whiskey to just kind of very slowly age in. It's perfect. It's really a perfect space for aging the whiskey. But just one point on that, so we have storage on site, or kind of on this site for 300, but we store everything on the island. So we also have another warehouse just down the road that we store, that we have capacity for about 3 years worth of stock. So we're going to be, everything that we produce will be stored on the island. We've got this warehouse right in the building that we're going to be storing some of our own stuff, but mostly founder casks, so that people can come visit them and visit the distillery, visit their cask. But we're storing everything that we produce on the island, which is another big part of making whiskey on the island. We want the kind of salty Atlantic air to be blowing through the warehouse. We want we want this environment to be shaping the whiskey that we're making, and it is a really just on the whole, the climate on the west coast is very stable. The temperature, it doesn't really get very warm and it doesn't really get very cold. It is quite stable on the island. It's really is quite ideal conditions for making whiskey.
I mean, I'm thinking too, and this is also going towards the effect of the island on the whiskey, that you've still got about a year and a half until the first run is, I guess, officially called whiskey. I know right now it's technically spirit, but we're calling it whiskey because it'll get there. And with it being a stable, cooler temperature, and I know we'll see what the profile is at the end once it's fully aged, but I would imagine you're going for one that's going to be more based on oxidation versus a lot of wood interaction and tannins in there, because it's not going to have the heat required to just push the liquid in and out of the wood to get that characteristic. So is that the case? And like, what are you looking for in the original new make that the wood will then just allow to blossom?
So the style of whiskey that we're filling a lot of first fill bourbon at the moment, but we are, and that's mainly because we do want actually quite a lot of spirit interaction with the wood. But we're now starting to fill a lot, or we're going to very soon start filling a lot of refill as well, to kind of layer in a bit more of a spirit forward character. It's a really interesting question. It's not something that I've kind of really thought about, is that variation in temperature kind of sucking the liquid in and out of the wood, and that having a big effect on extraction. That you said extraction of tannin in particular.
I just say that one because that's the one that, frankly, I don't enjoy, that when a whiskey is super tannic. But it can be tannin, it can be color, or lignans, any of those flavors. You're going to get more of them, as you said, in the first fill than you will in the refill.
Yeah. Tannin. You extract a lot of tannin, and that tends to need a lot more time to integrate. And I think that's what you were getting with the oxidative aging. You extract all this tannin, and then what you want you want a lot of oxygen interaction in order to start oxidizing that tannin and kind of break it down, so it's not that dry woody effect. It's more providing kind of body and structure and mouthfeel. I'm not really sure where I was going with that. We hadn't really considered, I don't think, the temperature fluctuation and what that would actually do. What we wanted to produce was the spirit style that we're producing. We obviously want spirit to be ready relatively early, but we don't want that. We do want growth. We do want space within that spirit so that it's not finished relatively early, because you want to be able to release something quite early, but you also want to still be able to release it when it's 10 years old and it still have somewhere to go, still have some kind of some complexity in there. So you're not just kind of you don't just have a kind of a bland spirit that just keeps extracting wood character. So we're producing something with a relatively robust style, but we're filling quite a lot of kind of relatively active wood. It's not very active. It's first fill bourbon, So it's so we're getting a lot of activity from the first fill bourbon, um, but we're now going to be layering in a lot of refill wood as well. So we've got a bit more space for a bit more kind of complexity to develop more spirit forward character. So the spirit that we're producing, and we're doing very long fermentations. We're trying to produce this more kind of robust, complex style. But when I'm actually tasting the new make, it's kind of remarkably smooth. I think these long fermentations actually they really you get a lot of sweetness in the make. You get and from the older barley varieties, you get a lot of oiliness and texture that really maybe not masks, but it really kind of helps smoothen out the whiskey. It already kind of tastes. It tastes really good. I think it's got a lot of room to develop, and I think it's going to actually be very palatable at quite an early age as well. We're really happy with everything that we're tasting right now. It's kind of as I say, it's a very exciting time. It's all very interesting.
So, we've only got less than 10 minutes left, just to be conscious of your guys' time as well. So I want to spend a couple minutes just asking about the gin, because that's really how the business grew and was born. So Jonny, you said in one interview it took something like 250 distillations to get that gin recipe just where you wanted it.
Yeah,
that's right. Which must have been quite of a frustrating process.
Yeah, I mean, that was, when we were had a little desktop still and developing a recipe, and we had in our mind what we wanted, very citrus forward gin. We'd kind of identified for a lot of market research at the time that, we quite liked a gin that stood up very well against tonic water and didn't get drowned out. And, when we were trying a lot of competitor products, we kind of noticed that by the time you made a kind of perfect serve of, 1 to 4 tonic water, you actually started to struggle identifying whose gin was which. And, we decided to create a big, bold gin, really, that's got a lot more flavor in there and stands up very well as a long serve, where you can add a full bottle of tonic water to a 25 ml measure, for instance, which is what the standard is in Scotland. Yeah, really iterative process. And, we got a professional forager up to the island and spent a few days touring around the island and picking different botanicals and distilling those. We had like a botanical library, and then went through a process of sampling each one of those botanical botanicals as a distillate, writing down the flavor profile that it brought, and then building up a recipe that way. So you take some drops from different bottles and kind of blend stuff together that way. So in that respect, it's you don't need to. It's not quite as labor intensive of running the stills all the time. You can quite quickly iterate. But yeah, every evening we'd do a gin tasting, and it took 250 evenings for us to really kind of nail down a recipe. And it wasn't like a eureka moment where we said, we've nailed it. It was, we just ran out of time, basically. We said, God, we need to get started. This is good enough. Let's just go for it now. And that's our Scottish dry gin, which comes in the blue bottle. And it's got about 80 grams of botanicals per bottle, which is a lot. Industry standards about like 30, 35 grams, for a craft gin, or 28 for a kind of more, kind of cheaper alternative. And it's not to say that less botanicals is bad or more is good. It's just the way we've gone for our recipe, basically. But it does create a grown-ups G&T. It's like a big, bold G&T, and lots of juniper, lots of citrus. And that's like your pre-dinner G&T you'd have. It's very, very satiating. So, you kind of have one and be quite satisfied. If you're kind of going for an all-day session, sun shining, you're out in the garden, you might want to go for something with slightly lower ABV from our range. It's a bit more kind of easy on the palate kind of thing. So we've got about 6 different gins in our portfolio now that fall under our DOWNPOUR brand, all in these kind of like brightly colored bottles. And it's a flavor for everyone there. The kind of concept behind the DOWNPOUR brand really was that, big, bold flavors. So the word downpour flavor, and there's a rain pattern on the bottle. So the kind of packaging, the name, the liquid inside is all quite joined up in its thinking with this kind of USP, which is, extra botanicals for a bolder flavor, which means it stands up very well in a long serve.
I mean, I love the packaging. I remember hearing that you were doing like twice, like you said, at least twice, if not more, the botanicals concentration by weight. So you're going to get a super, super flavorful gin. That's the kind that I like. I do drink gin quite a bit. People think I'm only drinking whiskey, but I do really enjoy gin. And even to hear you say like these, because it has so much more essential oil in there from the botanicals, it's actually flocculating when diluted, which I know some people are all about. They want that clear gin and tonic or the clear gin no matter what, but you're leaning into the other way of like, no, we want the botanicals, the flavors in there, and the flocculation is part of the experience rather than a detraction.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like in the US. There's a lot of gins that do that. In the UK, there's kind of like, 3 or 4 I can think of. And there's one in Europe that comes to mind as well. Yeah, it's a bit more unusual for, call it like lushing, or flavor cloud is like the customer facing term, which is quite nice. Again, flavor cloud and downpour is a bit of a blend itself. But yeah, you just get the slightly kind of pearlescent hue when you're making a cold G&T, and you can actually see the oil swirling in the glass. And yeah, I like that personally. I kind of like non-chill filtered whiskey, and I like beer that's not filtered, cloudy beer basically. So I kind of lean into that really, and I think it's more flavor in your glass.
I love it. And again, I'm sorry that we're almost out of time, because I could definitely spend more time on the gin as well. But I did have one more question I wanted to ask you guys, which applies to both of you, which is, Jonny, you had said, this is another interview, that you feel like distillers should be front and center in marketing efforts, because sometimes hearing how a process is done from a distiller or on a tour or at a show is going to be great for the customer. It's going to be totally different than even a very well-educated, well-meaning sales rep. But to hear it from the distiller is something totally different. So is that something you're still promoting? And Jacob, how comfortable do you feel being a front face like that?
So first of all, yeah, I can't remember when I could have said that. So well done on finding that and put me on the spot. But absolutely resonate with that. I mean, we've actually, I mentioned before, this is the first whiskey podcast we've done. And, it was so important that Jacob came on this so we can, really communicate what we're doing on the whiskey side of things. Yeah, and we're just going to start going to whiskey trade shows this year, and, having distillers there is important, even more so on the whiskey side of things than the gin side, because, whiskey enthusiasts are much more engaged and informed than gin enthusiasts. And, not to detract from gin enthusiasts, but, there's a level of geekery that goes on in whiskey that doesn't seem to translate into the gin sector as much. So, we've got really experienced gin ambassadors here, the people that work in our shop and kind of promote the brand at events. And they've been working here for years and years and all very experienced, and they do tours and know the production process. But there's definitely something to be said for, going to a whiskey show and a customer being able to, speak to the distiller and really have an engaged conversation, and that any question they've got is basically going to be probably likely to be answered. So that's my thought on that. And yeah, Jacob, anything else on that?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm quite uncomfortable with it myself. But I agree with Jonny that as a whiskey fan, I like to be able to listen to an actual distiller or someone that I can tell really knows what they're talking about. So it is definitely something that we want to do as well. So it's just kind of, I've just got to kind of get out of my comfort zone and do it.
I guess you don't see that too much, obviously, with the bigger companies. They've got their brand ambassadors, their brand team and marketing team that go to these events. But the luxury of us being small is that we can send some of the team out. We can make those decisions ourselves. What's quite nice about the gin category is that a lot of it's quite small businesses that have all started in the last kind of 10 years or something, when the gin boom started. And when you go to a gin show in Scotland, you quite often chat to the founder at a stand, which is really good fun as well. So I certainly recommend any of your listeners to this, if they're in the UK, to go to gin trade shows as well, because you can really have some fun conversations and hear from the brand owner. But yeah, certainly for us, it was important to extend that and have some of the production team there.
Oh, well, Jonny, Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time for coming on to talk about North Uist Distillery, to bring us back to the Outer Hebrides. Hang out with me for just a minute after finish recording.
Super, yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely glad to be your first whiskey show, and catch you on the early side. Take a look at the show notes for this episode for more information, anything we didn't cover in the interview, that different technical details, and more information about the distillery, where you can follow them, where you can see if you can get on the list and maybe buy a cask if that's up your alley, or just keep an eye out for when other whiskeys will be available, and where you can get their gin in the meantime. So once again, Jonny and Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you everyone for listening. Please like, rate, and subscribe wherever you do listen. Let's keep those 5-star ratings going on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and I'll see you all next week.